Hello and welcome to the Progress Theory, where we discuss how to implement scientific principles for optimizing human performance. On today's episode, we're joined by Associate Professor Jess Hill, an exercise physiologist and an expert researcher into the use of compression garments. Compression garments are readily used within sport, particularly endurance sports such as running and cycling, and team-based sports, field-based sports such as football and rugby. However, like many sports equipment available on the market, it makes you wonder, 1, are compression garments worth the money? And 2, do they actually work? Do they actually improve peak performance by improving our rate of recovery? In this episode, Jess answers those questions. She discusses what type of compression garments to wear, when to use them, and also if using them too much can actually decrease the level of adaptations you're trying to achieve through training. As always, follow the Progress Theory on Instagram, YouTube, and your podcast app. Here is Dr. Jess Hill. Jess, how are we?
Good, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for coming on the Progress Theory. Bringing you on here is kind of following a certain trend that I'm doing with the show.
Okay.
So similar to the Luke Hughes episode, we had his discussions around blood flow restriction training. Like, it's something that's really popular. A lot of people are starting to use, but I was unsure if a lot of people knew the science behind how it works. And I thought, what other things that people use quite often that I'm not sure people know as much about? And I was like, compression garments, definitely. And then I remember, for your PhD, do you remember that particular study where you recreated a marathon? And then I came down to act as a marshal.
Yeah.
And there's just broken people just coming down. I was like, right, compression garments, I've got to give you a shout to talk about that. So
I think in that study, they did 5-mile laps around Twickenham with an extra bit on the end to make it up to marathon distance.
That extra bit must have been very... You get to the end of the lap, you're like, oh.
And keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Just to mug them off at the end. Anyway, before we go into your subject area, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a physiologist. I have worked with lots of different sports teams, rowing, rugby over the years, helping out with various physiology aspects. And I've been working now at St Mary's since, I think, 2008. So I've been here a fair while. And my recovery, my area of expertise is in recovery from exercise-induced muscle damage. And my PhD was on compression and how effective it is as a recovery strategy.
And have you continued working on compression garments since finishing your PhD?
Yes, so we're carrying on that research now, and I've got a PhD student who's continuing really where I left off and doing some exciting research into the effectiveness of made-to-measure compression.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the topic then.
Yeah.
Like, what are compression garments, first of all?
Yeah, okay. So compression garments are tight-fitting garments that apply a level of pressure at various points. So you can get lower limb compression garments, you can get upper limb compression garments, you can get like forearm sleeves, calf sleeves, or you can get whole body compression suits. But the key thing is that they are designed to apply a level of pressure to the tissue underneath. And that's done in various ways. But the most common that you see is graduated compression, where it's tighter at the ankle or the wrist and then becomes less tight as you move up towards the midline of the body.
Oh, okay. What's the reason for that?
That I believe is related to blood flow. So it's supposed to help venous return to the heart by having the pressure graduated in that way. So facilitating the return of blood to the heart.
Yeah. And physiologically, how does it work? Like, where was the link between thinking, if we apply a bit of compression here, that would actually improve recovery?
Yeah, I think historically it's come from a number of places, and really it depends on what you're using the compression garments for. So they're typically used either for enhancing performance, in which case you're going to be looking for improvements in blood flow, or you're looking at reducing swelling and inflammation. So a lot of the reduction in swelling and inflammation comes from the traditional rest, ice, compress and elevate, or like clinical settings where we use compression to help patients with diseases like lymphedema or like swelling of the limbs and things like that. So we know that compression can help reduce the accumulation of fluid in a limb. So that is the similar response that happens to muscle injury when we exercise. So if we're exercising and getting a small amount of muscle damage, which is associated with an inflammatory response, the application of pressure might minimize that inflammation and help us accelerate the recovery process.
Okay. Is there a certain time where you have to put the compression garments on post-exercise for that to be maximized?
Nobody knows. So that it's a bit of a minefield, I think. So there's a lot of things we don't know, and we don't know any of the timings of when they should be applied. But the general consensus is put them on as soon as possible after exercise and continue to wear them. My advice is always wear them overnight if you can for at least 24 hours. But like if you think of, so if you're doing some exercise that's going to result in muscle damage, that muscle damage, the process is happening as you're doing the exercise. So you're getting that inflammatory response straight away. So you do theoretically want to apply that garment to reduce the swelling as soon as possible after exercise. So as quick as you can, shower and put them on.
So say, I've got half iron coming up in just under 2 weeks. Say I've performed the race.
Yeah.
Ideally get washed up as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Put the compression garment on.
Yeah.
Maybe stay in it overnight.
Sleep in it overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I then have to continue? Like, I'm not going to I've got work Monday, turn up in a full compression suit. Would it be a good idea to put it on again maybe in the evening and maybe do it for a few days after just to maximize recovery?
Again, we don't know, but we did we did a meta-analysis on compression a little while ago, and it said that a lot of the benefits that you get happen within the first 24 hours. So I would say as long as you put it on after the event, wear it overnight, you've probably got the majority of the benefits. I mean, if you can keep it on for longer, it isn't going to do any harm, but we don't know. We just don't know the length of time. There haven't been the research in that area yet to know.
Would the type of compression garment be very important? Because say I've done that or I've done a marathon, so there's a lot of stress on the legs, and say I've put like a compression socks on, and wear them for 24 hours afterwards. Would that be enough, or is it when you've done something like that where it's hugely fatiguing, essentially as well as peripherally? Could I wear just socks, or would it be recommended that I wear the full suit?
I don't think you need to wear a suit, but I do think that the compression needs to be on the affected muscle. So if you've done a marathon, you're probably going to have muscle damage in your quadriceps and your calves. So I would wear a full leg compression garment rather than just the socks, and you'll get the most benefit out of that, I would expect.
Okay. Is that what you found with that particular study?
With the marathon study, we found that it was just muscle soreness that was affected. So people that wore compression garments had significantly less muscle soreness compared to the placebo group. The placebo group was sham ultrasound. So the other group that didn't have compression garments, because it's quite hard to blind against compression, because you know whether you've got the compression garment or you haven't. So the background for that study was we wanted to look at the effectiveness of compression, but also control for placebo effect. So we told people that we were looking at different therapeutic treatments to help with recovery, and half of the group had compression, and the other half of the group, we told they were having therapeutic ultrasound. So we put them on a massage couch, put the ultrasound machine on, covered them with ultrasound gel, went through the motions, but we didn't turn the ultrasound machine on. So Yeah. The only significant finding we had with that study was that soreness was reduced with compression. But I think what we have to remember with that particular group of people is that they were highly trained individuals. There's not many people that you could say, can you run a marathon for me? Just 5 mile laps around St Mary's and an extra little bit on the end to make it up to a marathon. There's not many people that could do that. The people that are doing that, the people that can do that are running those distances all the time. So they're habituated to the training. So they probably experience significantly less muscle damage doing that event than somebody who's probably trained for their first marathon.
Yeah.
So I think that would have an impact on the findings.
Yeah. I can imagine the people that took part in that study, right, the marathon's long enough for you to think, right, I need to train up for that.
Yeah.
Marathon out of the blue, no, I'm not going to do that. I need to train up for that.
Yeah.
So for people to volunteer for that must be pretty good runners.
And also, I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think the average completion time for that marathon was about 2 hours, 50 minutes, 3 hours. So,
really?
So those people, or maybe it was around 3 hours.
Yeah.
I can find the exact time if you want it. But those people, just those people that are able to do it that quickly, are seasoned runners.
Yeah.
So they're familiar with that type of exercise, and they don't get the same amount of muscle damage. So the inflammatory response is going to be less.
Yeah.
And therefore, the capacity of the treatment to have an effect is going to be smaller.
So do you think the effect of compression garments would be better or more effective in those that are less trained?
Yeah, I think their capacity for them to have a beneficial effect is going to be greater in those people who are less well trained, because their inflammatory response is going to be greater. So because they're not familiar with, like we know with exercise-induced muscle damage, the people that suffer are the people that aren't familiar with the type of exercise or are doing something that's really heavy on like eccentric muscle actions. So when those sorts of people will have a greater muscle damage response in terms of like they might feel more sore afterwards, they'll have a greater inflammatory response, they might feel more stiff, the range of motion will decrease, a reduced ability to produce force. All of those negative symptoms associated with muscle damage are going to be greater in the unaccustomed individual than they will be in your highly trained participant or athlete. So then if you're looking at a strategy to minimize negative symptoms, it's going to have greater influence or a greater capacity to work when you've got a greater magnitude of the symptoms that are being experienced.
Yeah, of course. Is there an element of a placebo effect? And the only reason I say that is because when I've put like compression leggings on, they feel pretty good.
They do.
And if you put them on after you've just run, I don't know, half marathon, whether it works or not, you're like, oh, that feels good. So the psychological effect might be quite powerful. I don't know. Is there anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't anything that's directly assessed that. But I think from what we know about the placebo effect and the power of the placebo, that it 100% is going to have there will be a placebo effect. It's going to be, I guess, and I'm not a psychologist, but to somewhat like your belief in how effective that garment is probably going to be influence your response. A lot of the measures we take are subjective as well. So we say to you, how sore are you feeling on a scale of like 1 to 10? And if you really like the comfort and the feel of the garment, you might be like, yeah, this feels great. I feel great. Like I don't feel sore at all because these feel lovely. And they are manufactured to feel nice, and they look nice, they feel nice, they're sleek. And interestingly, you think they're going to be uncomfortable to sleep in, but a lot of the feedback we've had throughout our research is that people really, like anecdotally, liked sleeping in them, and people were saying that they had, and this is only anecdotal, better night's sleep when wearing the garments, which I thought was quite interesting and a little bit unexpected.
Yeah. I've seen recently that weighted blankets when sleeping are getting popular. I don't know if it gives a bit of a very comforting feeling.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's a similar effect.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I have no idea if anyone's looked at like any physiological changes that is caused by just having some kind of weight or compression on the body, and then that makes you...
I don't know of any research that has, but yeah, I mean, I guess it probably works in a similar way there.
Yeah. I wonder how it would feel to sleep in like just the legs versus the full compression.
Full suit.
If I turned up to bed, my wife's going to look over and go, "What are you wearing?" And I'm just there looking like I'm ready for bobsled.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some of the conversations of the people that have taken part in my studies over the years when I'd like you to wear some compression garments and I want you to keep them on for 48 hours, please, even to sleep in. I'd love to have heard some of those conversations. What are you doing coming to bed in those? We've had various types as well. So we've had the sports, like the sports types that you get off the shelf, like standardized sizes. And then we've also looked at the medical garments, which look like tights.
I had to wear some of those when I've had my knee surgeries.
Yeah. So they're very different. They look different. They feel different. The fabric's different. And then we've also looked at made to measure. So they all there's quite a variety.
Okay, because I remember a while ago you said about made to measure.
Yeah,
and how that is really important when it comes to the effectiveness of the compression garment.
Yeah.
So if you bought one off the
shelf,
you don't know how effective it's going to be because it isn't specific to your body shape and size.
Yeah, I mean, I think with compression, you want to make sure that you're actually getting some compression. And the difficulty is you don't know because you're the typical athlete that might buy a pair of compression garments has got no way of knowing how well their garments are fitting. And if you think of like your branded garments that you buy in standardized sizes, usually it says what's your height, what's your weight. Based upon your height and weight, you're either a small, medium large, extra large, like large with a long leg. So you're categorized into a particular size based upon your height and weight. But if you think you've got 10 people who are all a size medium based on their height and weight, they've all got very different body shapes. So some people might have large quadriceps, some people might have large calves, some people might have smaller calves. And then the leg profile, for example, is going to vary, and therefore the compression across that group of people who are all a medium is going to be different. So we've actually looked into that as well, where we fitted up 50 people with commercially available compression garments based upon their height and weight, and looked at how much compression they were getting from those garments, and the range was huge. Some people were only getting about 4 millimeters of mercury, with some people getting the target, which is about 18 to 22, depending on where you're looking on the leg.
Yeah.
But the majority of the people fell short of the optimal.
So they're not getting enough
compression. So they're not getting enough compression.
That's interesting.
But then another issue with the compression research is we don't actually know how much is beneficial.
Yeah.
So we think it probably works a little bit like an inverted U, where you have an optimal amount, but then when you go above that optimal amount, you start to see detrimental effects. But there hasn't been enough research to show what that optimal level of compression is. There are some studies out there that have looked at different compression pressures. So we did one such study ourselves, looking at the commercial garments off the shelf versus we looked at medical garments, clinical grade 2, which are fitted slightly different. So they're fitted based upon your leg circumference. So you measure your thigh and your calf circumference at about 7 or 8 points up and down the leg. And then your garment is fitted based upon your circumference measures, which is going to give you a more accurate fit. But we made sure that the level of compression was much tighter in those clinical grade 2 garments. And we found that the higher pressure delivered by the clinical grade 2 garments was more effective in reducing some of the symptoms of muscle damage compared to the commercially available garments that are fitted based on height and weight, because that population received lower level of compression. So we do suspect that higher compression is better up to a point, but we don't know what that point is.
Yeah. You said earlier about was it 18 to 20?
Yeah, so we think it's about 18 to 22 millimeters of mercury is the optimum. That's the general recommendation in the literature. But you could go higher than that, a little bit higher than that. Not too. I wouldn't. I mean, I guess we don't know, but I think you could go higher than that a little bit and see beneficial effects. But I guess the higher the level of compression is, the more uncomfortable they become to wear, particularly for long periods of time. So,
do you think those that are more experienced in sport may need the higher level? So if you've got novice, amateur, elite, for example, as 3 categories of athletes, do you think lower pressure for the novice, amateur would have slightly more, elite would have slightly more than that, but we still don't really know what kind of boundaries they are?
I mean, this would only be speculative because I don't know the answer, and I don't know that the research is out there to answer it. But I would say it doesn't matter. What matters is going to be the level of inflammation that you're getting. So if we think about the mechanism, when you're experiencing inflammation, you're getting an increase, infiltration of fluid and white blood cells to the damaged area. So that causes the limb circumference to increase slightly. Now, the application of compression, what we're doing is we're compressing that tissue. So we're reducing the space available for swelling to occur. So if you're going to experience a bigger inflammatory response, if anything, I'd say a tighter garment would be better because you're going to reduce that space for swelling to occur even more. That would be, but that is just a guess. And I think with elite athletes, they've already gone through, like with the training load, they've already gone through the muscle damage and recovery cycle. So they're familiar, they're habituated with the training, the amount of inflammation they experience as a part of their day-to-day training is going to be very low anyway. So I don't necessarily think the level of compression would matter in that way.
Is there anywhere online where people can get made-to-measure type compression garments?
Yeah, so there are a couple of companies that do made-to-measure garments, and they will scan your limb and they can, I think, almost 3D print a garment that's specifically tailored to your own personal measurements. It's highly technical. You can even tell them what pressure you want, and they should be able to manufacture the garment to that specific pressure.
Wow. Are they expensive
clever.
or... I mean, I can imagine that being quite expensive,
but
it'd be worthwhile.
I don't think that... I'd say they're probably twice the price of your commercially available garment, but you know that you're getting... You could buy your commercially available garment and it doesn't give you any more compression than a standard pair of running leggings.
Yeah.
You've got no way of knowing. But at least if you got the made-to-measure garments, you know that they're going to be giving you a good level of compression. It's tailored to you. The garments are made specifically for your profile.
Yeah. I mean, compression garments seem to cost around 40, 50 quid anyway.
Yeah.
The thought of paying 50 quid for something that may not work sounds awful to me. So I'd rather pay 100 quid
for something that you know is going to work. Yeah, absolutely.
It makes complete sense to me.
Absolutely.
If using compression garments can really aid with recovery, can it also help with improving performance? If we can recover quicker, then does that in turn help with improving performance? Yeah,
I mean, a lot of the recovery research comes from that. So we kind of, if we think about how we train and our competition, the person that tends to do the most training has the most adaptation and therefore is more likely to win. So we know, if we look at training theory, that like after a period of training, you have a temporary reduction in performance, and you have to wait a period of time before your performance goes back to baseline or you get a slight improvement. If we can reduce that recovery time, then theoretically somebody can do more training in the form of volume, intensity or frequency. So in that way, potentially, yes, recovery strategies like compression garments can improve performance. But I guess the other way that compression garments are used are as like a performance during. So some people might wear them during exercise to enhance performance. I think A lot of the research on compression is inconclusive, but generally we believe that there aren't any performance benefits of wearing garments whilst you're exercising.
Yeah.
The benefit of compression happens afterwards as a recovery strategy, by accelerating that recovery process, minimizing the negative symptoms associated with muscle damage. And then potentially you can do more training and improve performance that way.
Okay. In my head, when you're saying it's about the type of exercise to get some kind of physiological response, I'm thinking eccentric exercise to create some kind of muscle damage.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to try and achieve improvements in hypertrophy, you want to increase the amount of muscle damage. So I'm thinking, I don't know, whatever sport, but also like, say, I don't know, bodybuilding. I can imagine bodybuilders being really drawn to this level of recovery because if they can create as much muscle damage as possible, quicken the level of recovery, then they can get back to training to create more muscle damage, and the cycle keeps repeating, but it does it in a quicker way.
Yes, but I guess there's another there's another grey area there, or like maybe a minefield, and that is so. If we're using these recovery strategies like compression garments to reduce inflammation, and we're using them all the time, we know that inflammation is important for adaptation. So a lot of your adaptation happens in the recovery phase, and is driven by the inflammatory response. So if you're minimizing the inflammatory response, is that having a negative effect on adaptation? So are you affecting adaptation by doing so? There isn't any research that has specifically looked at compression having an effect on adaptation, but we know there is emerging research in cold water immersion that suggests frequent use of cold water immersion to reduce the inflammatory response is blunting adaptation.
Okay,
so there's one study that's been done that I know of that it's a training study. So 2 groups of individuals did the same strength training. One group had cold water immersion after the sessions. The other group didn't. And the strength gains were greater in the group that did not have the cold water immersion. So I would be wary of wearing compression garments all the time. My advice would be to not rely on them as a recovery modality after every exercise session. But if you're doing your event like a half an Ironman where you're expecting to feel sore afterwards, you've probably done your training and you've got your adaptation up to that point. So I would wear the garment after that event to help with the recovery and the reduction of negative symptoms afterwards.
Okay. That does make a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. Or like if you're involved in a tournament like rugby sevens and other sports in the Olympics where you have to compete multiple times over a short period of time, I would wear the garments then between games or between your competitions to help maximize recovery in a short period of time. And because you've done your training up to that point, you've got your adaptation. It shouldn't have any detrimental effects on the adaptive response.
So it really sounds like when you wear the compression garments is
key.
a huge factor.
Yes, I would say.
Wear it too much, it blunts your adaptive response.
Yeah, it could do. We don't know, but yeah, it could do.
Yeah. Wear it at the wrong time, you won't get the effect of wearing a compression garment.
Not tight enough, you won't get any effect. There's lots that we don't know.
Yeah. I was wondering if we could conclude it by like, what are the key things to look out for when, or what are the recommendations for wearing compression garments? So one would be made to measure.
Yeah, made to measure if possible. If not, and you're fitting them based on your height and weight, try and get the smallest size that you can fit into. Because the amount of compression is going to be more. So if you're on the cusp of sizes, go into the smaller size. Made to measure if possible. Put it on as soon after exercise as you can and keep them on for 24 hours if possible. Sleep in them if possible. And it's going to have the biggest effect probably after resistance type exercise. And the biggest effect you'll see within the first 24 hours. 24
hours. And it will be very dependent on the type of exercise. You said resistance, but anything which is going to cause a lot of mechanical damage.
Yeah.
And then you put the compression garment on the area that would have had that damage. So like running, you would have calves and quads.
Yeah. Make sure you're applying it to the area where the damage is going to happen, because if you think what we're trying to do is reduce the space available for swelling to occur, so you need to apply that compression to the area where the swelling is going to be, and that's the area that's been damaged.
Yeah. So with my half iron,
with your
coming
half
up,
Iron Man, I would put them on afterwards.
Just after the event.
As soon as you can after the event.
Say that with my training leading up to it. So I've got 8 weeks, and the largest runs or cycles often happen at the weekends because that's when you have the most time to be able to do that sort of thing. Would you recommend wearing them after like a big key session as well, or just...
I mean, it's a trade-off because if you've done a big session and you're looking for adaptations from that session, and you could be affecting the adaptation by wearing them, but then if you know that you're going to be wanting to train again the next day, that is a tough question. It's a trade-off. So I think ultimately it's going to be what works for you. It's probably a cop-out answer.
No, I think that's a wicked answer, because especially one of the aims of this podcast is to show how multifactorial everything is, and you're trying to weigh up all the different factors and make a decision. And a lot of the time you make that decision with the best interests.
Yeah.
You don't really know if you've made the right decision until it's all passed through and you reflect on it. But it's important to discuss all the things that can affect it, so you have the ability to make the best judgment you can.
Yeah.
So
it's like, I think it depends on the aims of that training block that you're in. If it's a training block to improve adaptation, then I wouldn't wear the garments probably. I'd say try not to, unless you're really struggling.
Wear it afterwards. I think that's what I'm going to do for 24 hours after the half iron.
I've got a selection. You can borrow a pair if you want.
All right. I've been thinking that if I can't get made to measure, I'll order an extra small and just try and squeeze into it to try and... Well, I suppose it's the inverted U. I'll probably end up going too far, wouldn't I? But
you'll know, because they'll start to feel uncomfortable.
Really?
I think so.
Yeah. That's the key subjective variable to look out for. Hurts?
If they feel uncomfortable, they're probably too tight. If your ankles or feet are swelling, they're too tight.
Yeah. Well, Jess, that was amazing.
No problem.
Okay, so we always ask this question to all of our guests. If you had to pick any guest to be on the Progress Theory, who would you have? It doesn't necessarily have to be related to compression garments, but who do you think would be really quite interesting? One person or maybe a group of people?
I think it would be really interesting to see a conversation between the CEO of a company who manufactures commercially available garments versus the CEO of a company who manufactures made-to-measure garments. I would like to see a discussion between those guys over who thinks their garment is more superior and why.
That would be cool.
That would be interesting.
More debate, because there are clearly some really good products out there.
There are.
But there are key variables which affect the effectiveness of the product. So
absolutely.
Mass production. Get them to defend it?
Yeah, like mass production is going to mean sacrifices, but that doesn't mean that the garment is a poor garment. I don't know. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to hear.
Might have to get you on as well.
Good debate.
Because it would be good to have someone that's done a lot of science research behind it. You could be the debate leader.
The debate leader.
Well, no, that's an actual role, isn't it? When someone's like the head of the debate. Oh dear.
I know.
I'm sure it's got a certain title. But anyway, Jess, thank you. That was absolutely amazing.
Thank you for having me.